Please welcome director Joseph Kosinski.
Thank you. Sounded great from outside.
Welcome. Thanks for being here, Joseph.
Thanks so much for having me.
I caught the last few minutes of the film, and I was struck with the emotion. It's such an emotional impact that we get from this film. As opposed to action films, it's all about emotion. Can you tell us about that aspect, the fact that the film rides on this emotional aspect?
Well, the first film really was a drama wrapped in an action movie. It was a rite of passage story of this young kid who was trying to get outside the shadow of his father's legacy, falls in love for the first time, loses his best friend. And I saw that movie when I was 11 years old. So definitely made a huge impact. So when we approached this film, I knew that we had to also approach it as a drama, first and foremost. And it also had to be a rite of passage story for Maverick. But now he's in his 50s. So what is that journey? And I thought, well, if the first movie was journey from, a boy becoming a man, so to speak, this movie would be a man becoming a father. And that's, I think, what you feel at the end when Rooster walks up next to him at that airplane and they're working on it together. Maverick has gone from this kind of lonely guy at the beginning of the film, kind of surrounded by memories of the past. And at the end of the film, he's got this really unique family around him. And I think that's why it resonates, because it's, you really feel that.
Mm-hmm. The film could have been, like other sequels, a nostalgia trip. Instead, one of the things that I was blown away, and I'm still blown away from the first time I saw it, is that the nostalgia comes across during the progress of the story. Is that you're moving forward storytelling-wise, but the nostalgia and what happened before just gets delivered to us like piecemeal throughout. Can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, well, Tom and I said from the very beginning, we don't want to make a cover band version of Top Gun. So how do you do that? And I think it's just, like you said, it's leading with story first. So, for instance, when I first started on this film and people found out about it, they'd come up to me in like restaurants or wherever they saw me, and they'd ask me, is there going to be a volleyball scene? And after about the 10th person said that, I was like, okay, I think we need to put in a volleyball scene. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't feel like nostalgia, where we're just putting it in for the sake of having a beach scene? So we made sure that we always had story drove everything. So we came up with this concept of dogfight football, where Maverick uses that day at the beach to bring the team together, to teach them about the kind of chaos of war, where you have offense and defense at the same time. And so we approached that in every aspect of the movie, which is we always made sure that we were driving the story forward in every single scene.
You also create, Maverick has relationships with Hondo, we see Maverick with Peggy, we see Maverick with Iceman, where like we get the sense that this man actually had a life between the original and now, which is like rare in sequels, where we don't, the relationships are etched and developed. Can you tell us about
Well, again, that's, I think a legacy from the first film. If you ask anyone, what they remember about Top Gun and Mav's, relationship, most often they'll talk about his friendship with Goose. Like that is the kind of, that notion of a wingman was something that the first film kind of created, and now it's just a term we use every day. So it's always been part of the Top Gun DNA, and it starts with that opening scene where you see all the photos on Mav's wall of all these people, going back from pictures of him with his father to, we even hid in a picture of Penny Benjamin on that wall, if you watch closely the next time you see it, and hint at this, young kid that he's kind of a pseudo-father to, but they've grown estranged, obviously, which is the story of this movie. But yeah, I have to give a lot of credit to, our screenwriting team, Tom, Jerry. Every single day we all pushed to make the best movie we could, and that just comes through iteration and iteration, working every scene and making sure we're always telling the best possible story.
You mentioned seeing things on the wall, but there is a little moment in the film where we see Rooster in the piano, young Rooster, and then we start seeing flashbacks. How did that come about in integrating little pieces from the old film into the edit?
That's interesting. That particular thing was not in the script. In the script, it said Maverick sees Rooster playing the piano, and it kind of relied on the audience's memory of the first movie to kind of trigger that. But when we were in editorial, I said to my editor, I was like, what might be cool here? There's a moment where Bradley's sitting on the piano in the first movie with a little cowboy hat, and I was like, what if we cut to a flash of that when he sees Rooster here? And the other thing we did was we doubled every frame in the flashback. So you're watching it at 12 frames per second instead of 24. And it just took a little bit of that reality out of it and made it feel more like a flash or a flicker. And we started dropping that in during that sequence. And as soon as we put that first flashback in and cut to Mav's face, it was like goosebumps. You could just see in Tom's performance that he was picturing that in his mind. And it was very effective, and really, I think, I'm glad we did it, because what we found was, when we started testing the movie, half the audience had never seen the first film, which I had, people my age, we all assume everyone's seen Top Gun, but the truth is, below 30 years old, most haven't. They've heard about it, they've maybe seen clips on YouTube, but most hadn't, half our audience had never seen the first movie. So
Which
it was a way
actually,
to fill that in.
A follow-up question, the fact that how your conception of the film and building the film, it stands alone. You don't need to see the previous film. How hard was it to build the film to stand on itself without, the previous one?
I think there was some intention there to make sure you knew what you needed to know. But honestly, I went in assuming most people had seen the first film. So I was really surprised that when we started showing the film, people who had never seen the first film were rating this movie exactly the same as fans of the first one. So some alchemy happened, or maybe it's osmosis or something, but somehow you get everything you need out of this film to watch it on its own merit. So I'd like to say that was the plan the whole time, but I think it was a little bit of a happy accident.
When I introduced the film, I told everybody that you made the choice that everything was shot practically, and I mentioned that the actors were actually inside the cockpits, and can you take us through that process? I mean, it was arduous.
Yeah, you can't imagine how difficult it is to be in one of these F-18s at 650 miles an hour.
And the actors are inside the F-18.
All the actors are actually inside the planes. Now, when we started this, when I first pitched it to Tom, I knew Tom could do it, because Tom's an aerobatic pilot. He knows how to pull Gs. I knew Tom would be able to do this, but I didn't think the other actors were going to be able to do it. And what Tom did was he created a training program for all the other actors in the film. So he created a 3-month course that started them in really simple propeller planes, like your first flight lesson. Then they graduated to an aerobatic airplane, which is more intense. Then they went into a very small, lightweight jet to experience 5 or 6 Gs. So after 3 months of this training, it's called building up your G tolerance and understanding how planes fly and getting comfortable. Then they got to go in the real Navy fighter, and all of them were able to do their scenes in the F-18 for real, being flown by real Top Gun pilots, both men and women, in this film.
But the aspect, I mean, my mind was blown by the fact that understanding that the actors had to turn on their own cameras, they had to understand geography, where the spot.
Right. So we would start every morning with a 2-hour brief with all the actors, all the pilots, all of our Navy personnel, and we'd go through all the work of the day that we had to do, all the scenes we need to get in the jets. We had little model airplanes, and we'd play with them and show formations. We'd talk about the lines. We'd talk about where the light needed to be, what the geography was, how the plane needed to move. And that would be 2 hours in the morning. Then the actor, their pilot, and myself would go down to a wooden mock-up of the airplane that had 2 seats in it, just like the real plane, and we would walk through all the scenes of the day like we were rehearsing a play. And they would rehearse turning the cameras on, adjusting their visor, putting on a little sweat, tapping their helmet for sound, and then they would go action, and they would play the scene, and we would rehearse it on the ground over and over till it was like muscle memory. And then they would get in the planes, we'd line the cameras up, and then they would go off on their own for 2 hours. And I had no way to monitor what they were doing or listen. They would just go off, shoot their scenes, come back. We had 6 cameras in the cockpit recording everything. We'd take the footage, we'd load it right into the monitor, and we'd all sit around the monitor and watch what they had just shot there. And it was very nerve-wracking for them because they were, if they did anything wrong or forgot to roll the camera, everyone would see it. But they all just did an incredible job, and we would cheer when we saw something great, and it was this wonderful.
You booed when you saw something.
Yeah,
terrible.
Every once in a while someone would go wrong, but even Tom made a mistake once where he forgot to put his visor down, and he owned up to that. It's like things happen when you're up.
So you mentioned that it was like a 2-hour endeavor. Out of those 2 hours, how much of acting took place?
Yeah, well, they had to go to they had to get in the jet. Just getting one of these fighter jets off the ground takes about a half hour of prep. And then they'd take off. They'd fly 20 minutes to the mountain location they were shooting. Usually they'd get about 10 or 15 minutes of time to shoot. And out of that, we'd be lucky if we got 20 seconds of great material that we could use in the movie. In the end, we added it up. We shot 813 hours worth of footage for this 2-hour film.
But editing-wise, how did you guys were able to, see all this footage and grab? I mean, based on your story that you had built,
it took a lot of time. Our editor, Eddie Hamilton, is an MVP on this movie. I mean, he looked at all 813 hours. Just that final half-hour sequence, the third act, took him, I think, about 3 months to do a first assembly. It was so complicated. But we had him, and we had this amazing staff of young editors and some other editors assisting us to kind of make sure that out of that 813 hours, we had the absolute best 2 to put in this film.
Has this ever been done in cinema? I mean, you guys were pushing the limit when it comes to artistry. And
yeah, I mean, it's Top Gun. So, Tom said to me, he's like, Joe, we got to hit a bullet with a bullet. And everyone who worked on this film felt that every single day, that this was a really special film. We had Jerry Bruckheimer producing. We had Tom Cruise. We had Val Kilmer. Everyone felt the pressure to, deliver the absolute best film we could. And, I think you can see it on screen. Just not only everyone who worked on the film, but all the men and women of the U.S. Navy that helped us make this film. We couldn't do without them.
I caught again the last sequence, and it's so emotional, and we actually see the G-force on the actors. And, tell us about the importance of us seeing as an audience the G-force on the actors as they're, emoting.
Yeah,
as well.
well, I think we have amazing filmmaking tools for us today, and you can do anything you can imagine you can put on the screen. So I think in some ways, CGI is an amazing tool, but it can be overused because you can create anything, and it's cheaper and easier to shoot on a stage than it is to go to the Cascades of Washington and shoot in the middle of the winter to get some of these scenes. So I had seen some videos that Navy pilots had shot from their own cockpits. I'd seen it online. They'd put these little GoPro cameras on their cockpits and shot their training routes. And as soon as I saw that footage, I was like, well, this is more interesting to me than any aerial sequence I've seen in a movie, just because it's real. Like you can feel it. Something in your brain tells you this is really happening. And so that was the inspiration to say, can we fit a motion picture camera in an F-18 and actually get some of this footage for real?
And you guys rigged you created a new...
We worked with Sony to create a new camera system at the time called the Venice Rialto, which basically allows you to take the camera and split it into two pieces so that the sensor and the lens are one part, and it's connected via a cable to the recorder. So by breaking into two pieces, the part that's capturing the image is actually very small. It's like a 6 by 6 inch square. So at first the Navy said to me, you're going to be lucky if you can find space to put a camera in this cockpit. And in the end, we fit 6 in there.
Wow.
And I got to give credit to our DP cinematographer, Claudio Miranda, who stood with the Navy engineers and pointed at every piece of equipment in the cockpit and asked them if they needed it to fly. And whenever they said no, he'd say, take it out. So he made enough room for 6 bodies in there, and that's how.
But the actors had to actually do this.
Yeah, we rigged a switch that was connected to all 6 cameras. So when they flipped the switch up, all 6 cameras would roll simultaneously. So we had 4 angles at the actor. We had a close-up, a wide angle, and one pointing back over each shoulder. And then we had 2 cameras looking over the shoulder of the pilot. And we dressed the pilot in the same gear as the actor. So when you're looking forward, you feel like you're looking over the actor's shoulder. So between those 6 angles, it makes it feel like the actor's flying the plane.
And tell us about the toll on the actor.
Yeah, you can't imagine. Yeah, it's hot, it's uncomfortable. You can't go to the bathroom for a couple hours. And the forces on your body, they're called G's. So when you're turning at high speed, they were experiencing up to 7.5 times their body weight in some of these turns. And what that does is all the blood in your head goes to your feet. So you need to strain your body to push the blood back into your head so that you can remain conscious. So it's a technique that fighter pilots have to do to remain conscious to do these maneuvers. And our actors had to learn how to do that and then act. And then they have cameras in front of them which are blocking their view, so it's giving you, it's like a really bad case of, road sickness.
And they knew what they were signing up to when...
Okay, maybe I didn't tell them everything, but I think they knew the opportunity, and when they saw the footage of what we were getting, they all powered through. A lot of them got sick.
I remember reading Chuck Yeager's biography that he said he was vomiting nonstop during...
Yeah, the real pilots, until they get their their G tolerance built up, they often get sick too. So
your actors were getting...
Yeah, a couple of them got sick, and I have to say, they would get sick, and then they would continue filming to get all the shots. So it was like just, pure will and dedication from all the actors on this to get the shots.
And once you had shot all of this stuff with your did your editor come afterwards, or your editor was...
He was cutting all throughout. In fact, when we were shooting the aerial sequence, he was in a trailer in the hangar next to the airplanes. And I would get there early in the morning. We'd start at like 6. And we'd go through all the footage we'd gotten the day before. We'd do notes of what we needed, what worked, what didn't work. I'd tell them what the plan was for the day. And then every time we did a flight, we would load the footage in, and he would just be going through it all day long, and I'd be running in there being like, did we get it? Do we have what we need? He'd be like, oh, we need one more angle. You know, we need him looking left rather than right. And I'd run back to the brief, and we'd get them to do it in the afternoon flight. And it was this kind of around-the-clock process to make sure we were getting everything we needed. So it was all hands on deck.
Val Kilmer, you know, tell us about bringing him to the story. I love the fact that it's Val Kilmer, his character, that has the idea to bring Tom back to teach the mission, but also to reconcile with Rooster, which is so dramatic and powerful. Tell us about.
Yeah, well, we all wanted Val to be a part of it. Tom insisted that he wasn't going to make the movie unless Iceman was in it. So Jerry and I called Val in early on because we knew he had been struggling with an illness. And Val came in, and it was Val's idea to have Iceman also struggling with an illness. So I thought that was very brave on Val's behalf to integrate that into our story. And once Val gave us that idea, then it was, who is Iceman to Maverick? Well, he's his wingman, right? And Iceman, as you remember, he won the Top Gun trophy in the first film. He's the ideal Navy pilot who plays by the rules and advanced through the ranks, and now is the Pacific Fleet commander. And we love the idea that he was always looking out for his friend Maverick, who's always breaking rules and pushing the envelope. And, you know, he knew that when this mission came together, there was only one guy who knew how to fly it, but he also knew, as you alluded to, that Maverick needed to reconcile this relationship with Rooster, and that he couldn't go on without that relationship being repaired, and he thought this would be a great way to do it. So to have, you know, Val Kilmer, someone who I've admired his whole career, come in and reunite with Tom in this film, in that scene that you just saw, it was a real special moment, one I'll never forget.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, of course, Anthony Edwards, Rooster. I mean, blanking out.
Goose.
Goose. Yeah. Oh, how could I forget Goose? Goose lingers throughout this entire film. But then we have Rooster, and you've worked with Miles before, but in this, he actually recalls Anthony Edwards, and he recalls the original Goose.
That's, you know, a testament to what an incredible actor Miles is. And like you said, I had just done a movie with him called Only the Brave, which is a very dramatic film that he was just spectacular in.
Jennifer Connelly.
And Jennifer Connelly. And Jeff Bridges, who's, you know, a Santa Barbara resident.
The dude.
And so as I was kind of thinking about how to pitch this film to Tom, and this idea of Rooster being the relationship that he needs to reconcile, I couldn't help but think of Miles, because Miles is such a chameleon and can do the humor and can do the drama, which is so much of what Goose is. So in that very first pitch meeting to Tom, I actually had a picture of Miles and said, I think this guy might be our Rooster. So Tom had so much respect for Miles just based on the career he had done up to that point, because there aren't a lot of young actors that do the career that Miles has built for himself, you know, taking dramatic roles. And once I got them in a room together, it was clear that, you know, it was going to be something really special.
You and I briefly chatted about the fact we're both Columbia University graduates, and you study aerospace and mechanical engineering. Can you tell us about that? Can you tell us about that route, that all of a sudden you're studying aerospace and mechanical engineering, and then you end up in film, and then this film, how it all ties together?
Yeah, I guess I've been training for this movie my whole life. As a kid, I was building, you know, radio-controlled model airplanes, and was, you know, fascinated with aerospace and science and the space program. But I grew up in Iowa, very far from the film industry. I didn't know anyone who knew anyone that worked in this business. So I went to school for engineering and aerospace and design, and then switched to architecture at Columbia. And I was just very lucky that the school at that time was pushing film tools at us to study architecture, which was very cool. So I instantly started making short films, and one got into a little New York film festival and got noticed by an advertising executive, and I got a small Nike commercial, and then moved to LA and was unemployed for a year and a half, as it happens, and then finally, got that break, got my first commercial in 2006, and I've been pretty busy ever since.
Which brings me back to, I was so struck, I've seen the film a couple of times, the first sequence where we see Tom riding in the motorcycle on the sunset in the background. I couldn't think about your schooling and that first sequence that brought it all together. Can you tell us about shooting that sequence?
Yeah, that was like the first day of filming, and Tom on a old Kawasaki Ninja with the old jacket, racing across the desert. It's just, it's like one of those things where you finally get to create something you've been dreaming about for years. So it was very memorable to do that. The scene where Tom is racing the F-18 on the runway with the sun setting, we shot that 43 times before it was right.
Wow.
Yeah, over 3 days. The first 2 days, it was foggy and the sun never came out. And then on the third day, I think on take 12 or 13, the sun broke and Tom hit the mark perfectly, and the jet afterburners went off at the right time, and we got it. But we knew the bar for this movie was so high that every shot had to be perfect.
You talk about the sunset. When we think about Top Gun, it's like constant sunsets and volleyball playing and actually a jukebox playing in the background. Yep. But
good-looking people.
Good looking, of course. If you're bad looking, forget it. You're not going to be in this film. But I love the fact that the third act of this film, you flip it. We're now in snow, and
I love that idea. Yeah, because we had been in the Top Gun universe for 2 acts of, like you said, the endless sunset. I love the idea that when we went into the third act, we inverted that whole color palette, and all of a sudden we're in an ice-cold environment, which you would never expect in a Top Gun film. So I love that notion of, also I wanted to, create an enemy territory that no one could identify with any real world country, because I knew everyone would be desperate to try to figure out who we were, where we were going in that sequence. So we ended up shooting it on one of the Navy low-level training routes up in the Cascades in Washington State, which was...
But that switch in the third act, was it always in the script? Or
yeah, well, it wasn't written in the script that way, but in my head it was always going to be an opportunity to go from San Diego to this completely different environment. It had to feel like you're on the other side of the world, wherever that may be. And, we're just blessed here in California that you can shoot San Diego one day and you can, be shooting in a completely different environment.
But it was intentional, the fact that we have this Tony Scott world of sunsets to go in.
The opposite, yeah. I wanted Maverick and Rooster to end up in the snow. And one of my favorite scenes, which is where they finally come back together in the woods, that was shot in Lake Tahoe.
Wow. Tell us about the score, from Hans Zimmer to Lady Gaga.
Yeah. Well, it started with Harold Faltermeyer. The themes that you hear, obviously, at the beginning of the film with that bell and that very classic opening. That's
Kenny Loggins.
Yeah, you got Harold to kind of bring you back. You got Kenny Loggins, another Santa Barbara resident, with Danger Zone to kind of tell the audience, don't worry, you're in a Top Gun film, and we love it as much as you do. So that's just kind of meant to put our arms around you and say, come along for a ride. This is going to be a new story. From there, Hans had been working with Jerry for years. Jerry introduced me to him, and Hans was very excited to kind of figure out how to take Top Gun forward and take a lot of those themes and reorchestrate them. And then Lady Gaga just dropped this incredible gift in our laps with this song, Hold My Hand. And when we played it for Hans, he said, this melody is so good that I can integrate this into the love theme for the film. So you're hearing Lady Gaga's melody worked into the score from the very beginning, from the Dark Star sequence, all the way to the end of the film, so that by the time you hear her come in and sing at the end of the film, you've already heard that theme 6 or 7 times. And that's just Hans's genius and Lady Gaga's genius kind of coming together to create this really wonderful score for us.
That's great. We mentioned you worked with Jennifer Connelly before. Tell us about casting her and also creating her character, which the scenes with her and Tom have so much spark. They're so exciting.
I know, isn't it amazing that in both of their long careers, they've never worked together? I mean, she's been working as long as him, if not longer. She started at like 11 years old in Once Upon a Time in America. So I was very excited to be able to be the first person to put them together on screen because they are such a great match. She's, I mean, such an incredible actress, so intelligent, so emotionally intelligent on screen, which is what I knew Maverick needed in this film, someone like someone to talk to, a sounding board, but also a very strong, independent, smart woman who has a life of her own, which, that sailing scene was an important one for her character because she's in control of the boat and Maverick's kind of fumbling all over the deck. And so that was a really important scene. And Jennifer is, she's just an incredible actress. And I knew I had to surround Tom with the absolute highest quality, highest caliber actors I could find.
You have other candidates that we follow, played by Jacinto and Raymond Lee, and then we don't follow them. Can you tell us about that choice?
Yeah, it's, we have a number of young pilots that are in all the planes at the beginning that ultimately don't make the mission. And one of the hard things about cutting a movie down is you can't tell everyone's storyline. You start to find that, even though Hondo had this amazing scene with Maverick in the airplane, by the time you're cutting your movie, you have to be ruthless and really focus on the story you're telling. So unfortunately, some people end up on the cutting room floor, and you hate to do it, but you have to be ruthless in cutting your movie. And, we threw away some scenes that I loved as well because we just you have to make sure you stay on target, no pun intended, and, deliver a movie that's always pushing the narrative.
I greatly admire the fact that you made 2 decisions to make the film very emotional, the story very impactful, and then you also decided to shoot practically to see as the actors on, can you tell us about that choice? That now it sounds brilliant, but it must have been pretty bold at the time.
Yeah, well, first of all, I knew it was something that was going to get Tom interested because, he does everything himself. That's part of his brand. So when I was first pitching it to Tom, shooting it practically was a big part of it. And I just don't think you can fake what we captured by doing it any other way. There's an emotional reaction you have. I see people gripping the sides of their chair in the 3rd act of this film, and that's because you really feel that the actors are going through it in a way that's not. If we had shot that on a stage, you would just be able to tell. You just know. You just know it's not as same as doing it for real. So that was always important to me. And like I said, the Top Gun is always a drama wrapped in an action film. So we wanted to tell an emotional story. We wanted to tell a story of friendship and sacrifice that even if you have no interest in flying or naval aviation, there's something in this film that you can relate to in your own life.
And last question, working with Tom. Here's somebody who's pushing himself and the medium at the same time. Tell us what was it like for you to be working with him in this process?
It's incredible. This is my 2nd film with him, so I knew what I was in for.
Oblivion.
Yeah, Oblivion was the first one, and but this being Top Gun for him was the crown jewel, right? And so, like I said, from the beginning, he said we're hitting a bullet with a bullet. every single day he set the bar for everyone on the crew. He gave, it sounds cliche, but he gave 110% and was involved in every aspect of the production and just wants to entertain a worldwide audience.
Did you feel that he pushed you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Every day, no. And that push and pull is why the movie's great. My job as a director is to push him, and his director is to push me, and out of that, healthy creative tension comes the best version of the film. Absolutely.
And I can not only imagine the pressure on you. You had to live up to the Top Gun legacy and make this successful film. Give us a little taste of what it was like to be in your shoes during this process.
Yeah, you feel the pressure, but also I feel very lucky, very grateful to be, in the position to be able to do this. I loved working on this film every day, even the really hard days. I had Tom there. I had Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer of the first film. Val Kilmer was there, and we had a lot of crew. My DP, Claudio Miranda, was Tony Scott's gaffer on 3 films. So there was this sense that I created a team that.
But you
felt
had
like
a legacy to live up to. That wasn't never lurking above you?
Of course, no. I'm just very relieved it worked. Trust me. That when we at CinemaCon, when I watched the movie for the first time with an audience, and I could feel that they were with the film. They were laughing and crying and cheering. I was more than anything just relieved because, you do feel the pressure.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody.